Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Alma Vieru, and I'm the Vice President of Business Operations at LMT Technology Solutions, and we're happy to have you joining us. As you know, law firms are one of the top industries under attack. 46% of small, medium businesses have been targeted by ransomware at some point, and the reputational damage is possibly the biggest cost of the breach. In the next hour, you'll learn about steps you can take right now to enhance your law firm's security. These steps involve people, processes, and technology, the three pillars of cybersecurity. And getting the buy-in and educating people is quite possibly the most important step. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers, Nate Benitez, Vice President of Technical Operations at LMT, and Jay Ryerse, who's CISSP, and renowned cybersecurity and risk management expert. Nate, can you give our audience a brief overview of LMT?
Sure. Thanks, Elma. And hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So real quick, let me just provide some insight on LMT's background and our cybersecurity offerings. LMT is a SOC 2 Type 2 certified provider based in Rochester, New York. We've served as a national MSP and a cybersecurity consulting firm since 1996. We offer a comprehensive suite of services designed to help safeguard your firm's data and IT systems from cybersecurity threats. LMT's cybersecurity division is guided by CISSP certified professionals who employ layered strategies, cutting-edge solutions like zero trust, edge and endpoint solutions, 24/7 monitoring with SOC plus SIEM, and rigorous cybersecurity awareness training. We offer our partners all of these services to ensure that they stay ahead of the ever-evolving threats. After Jay's presentation, I'm confident many of you will want to explore additional measures to help protect your firm's data. So please feel free to reach out to me directly to explore how our IT risk assessment can provide you with the necessary insights needed for constructive discussions with your IT team. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jay Ryerse.
Hey, Nate, thank you for having me, and Alma as well for hosting this session. To the audience, I spend most of my time working with partners like LMT to help educate and teach what's happening with cybersecurity in the world. And we hear about the news, we hear about it from our insurance companies, from friends, but it's not something that we've ever really focused on to really dive into what it means to law firms specifically and what it means to your practice. Let's kind of set the stage for not just cybersecurity, but for technology. When I think about how things have changed, how fast they move, it's important to know that our point of view changes with time, right? If you think about this, back in the late 90s, we would tell our kids and our families, don't get into strangers' cars and don't meet people from the internet. And yet today, via an app, we actually pay strangers from the internet to get into their car. And so it makes no sense that we can move that fast and that in less than, 25, less than 30 years, our perspectives can change, and yet it does. And technology is moving that fast. Now, I'm not here to tell you that you can't operate and you can't run your business because of cybersecurity. And while some of the things are scary, I'm not trying to scare you. And when we're done with this session, that the sky is still going to be blue, and you're still going to have work to be done, obligations to reach. But I do want you to be aware of what's going on, what's happening. And from a cybersecurity perspective, what usually ends up happening is we put in these controls, these ideas, ways to say, okay, we're going to better manage things. And humans, the smart breed that we are, will find ways around those controls, right? Whether it be better passwords or some of those kinds of things. We'll skip the gate and the rules that say we have to have 12 characters in our password, and we'll find a way around it. So we've got to work together on this, because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is truly a team sport. So where do we start, right? What is this going to look like, and what do you need to know and understand? Well, the legal industry as a whole are one of the 5 consistently attacked targets, right? It's finance, it's healthcare, it's construction, it's manufacturing, and of course, the legal industry. And so if you know that you're one of the big targets, it means that you should start thinking about this a little differently when it comes to managing your risk. So what does that mean? Well, your expectations should be high, right? Raise the bar on what you expect. You should expect your team, whoever your team is today, to protect all users on any device, any time of day, from anywhere in the world to any source of data. That source of data is probably the most important part here to consider because it used to be that you had servers in the closet in the back, and that was all of your data, and they were sitting behind your firewall. And your risk, while there was some, it wasn't to the level that it is today. But while I was at the conference, I had the opportunity to kind of walk the show floor and see and meet some of the vendors and see what was out there today in the space. And it was interesting because just about every software vendor out there, was talking about their AI and how they're using AI in their space and their co-pilot, their virtual assistants, whatever it is. And yet no one's talking about how are they securing it, right? Before we just turn these features on, what does it mean to host data in the cloud? Who has access to it? How does it move? How do we have access to it? Who backs it up? And most importantly, how is it being secured? And these are questions that we should be asking, LMT and others, about their tools, because third-party risk is a big part of everything we have to manage today. Now, the biggest drivers for these kinds of things have been cyber insurance. In the cyber insurance industry, 4 or 5 years ago, they would tell you that the cost of policies was cheap and your ability to get coverage was high. And the typical survey or questionnaire that they would give you was like 4 questions. Do you have a firewall? Do you have antivirus? Do you have backups? Do you have an acceptable use policy? If you said yes to all those, they were going to give you a policy and it was easy to get. Well, then COVID happened and the workforce, got out from behind the firewalls and the risk went way up. And they took major losses during that period of time when the majority of workers were working from home. And so they started to get more prescriptive in their questionnaires, sort of asking better questions. They got smarter because they were tired of taking losses. And then they got so specific that they're now even asking, which tools are you using, right? Because they're measuring the quality of your tools against your ability to defend against attacks. In this particular example, we asked the Hartford, one of their agents, which of these tools, met their minimum needs, and they said 4. They wouldn't tell us which 4, right? So they're not being forthcoming, that they're just judging measurement and measuring their risk accordingly. And it's interesting because what's happened is the cost of premiums went through the roof, and your ability to get them got much more difficult. And companies like CFC, which is a global underwriter of these policies, is now asking, who is your service provider? What problems have you had in the past? How are you budgeting for IT and for security? And these are questions that a few years ago weren't even on people's radars. And they're even getting very specific now. This is one that Nate and I talked about quite a bit while he was in Denver. And that is they're asking, your Microsoft Secure Score and what solutions do you have in place and what actual technologies do you have in place? And if I came to you and sat down in your office today and said, do you have DMARC? You're going to look at me funny like, Jay, I have no idea what DMARC is. That's just another technology acronym that no one understands. But the technology behind it is good, right? It helps reduce spam and junk mail and verifies the sender on the other side. So it's good to have because half the attacks out there start with email. But this secure score is what really caught me off guard when I first saw this back in February. This is basically saying, hey, how good a job is your IT team doing at keeping your Microsoft tenant, where most of you have your email and your SharePoint, your files, and you're using Teams and other tools. What are you doing to secure that? And how good is that? Well, the reality is that they know that if you're doing a good job there, you're probably, paying attention to your IT and your security, and so your hygiene level is high and you're low risk, and they'll bring the cost of your policies down. If your secure scores are low, they're going to raise your premiums if they'll even give you coverage. Maybe they raise their premiums and cover half of what you used to have from a coverage level, right? Reducing their risk in the process. And look, we know that, 46% of SMBs have been targeted by ransomware, and of those, 73% paid the ransom. And that's as of a few years ago. That's not even most current numbers, because now it seems like everybody's paying the ransom because they're being held hostage. Now, what I will tell you is that this graphic from CNBC from a few years ago, I'm not seeing it put businesses out of business, but it takes 66 days to get back to normal right now. And so there are challenges with this, that even if you have to rebuild your data and go back and figure it out, or you pay the ransom to recover, paying the ransom doesn't put you back online in a matter of minutes. It still takes days and weeks to get you back up and running. So, thinking about this as a team sport with your providers and your third-party vendors is very, very important. And since we're talking, to law firms, there's one very specific case that you all should keep an eye on, and that is this law firm in Sacramento that fell victim, and now they're suing their software providers and then their vendors because they felt it was their fault. And the reality is they owned measuring and managing third-party risk. And did they have insurance? I don't know the answers to these questions yet, but it's a case that's probably worth following up on and paying attention to. Nate, I know you and your team are watching this one closely to understand what that impact is. And are you talking to your clients about that third-party risk? Are you guys having that conversation on a regular basis?
Absolutely. It's always forefront of the discussion.
Yeah, and we'll give some examples of third-party risk here in a moment, right? So that you know what I'm talking about, because it's not just your IT provider, but it's your accounting system vendor, it's your camera vendors, it's all your software solutions that you use to run your practice. And so at the end of the day, when you're talking to these vendors and talking amongst yourselves, we believe that today there's a shared responsibility. You as the data owner, the law firm, the managing partners, the practice managers, you own the liability. You are the data owner. This is your data. You're entrusted to protect this data. And we know that because you established the budget for protecting that. So the data owner has a key voice in this shared responsibility, but it's not just you. Your information technology team, they're responsible for correctly implementing the solutions that you provide budget for. If they deploy tools and they don't do so securely, that's a problem, right? So then you're going to need to make sure you're aware of that and paying attention to it. But they are the custodians of your data. And then there's your information security team. Sometimes it's a third party, but typically it involves your team and their team, because the information security team really are the risk managers. It's your information security committee. It's the teams that are involved in identifying and measuring risk, running vulnerability scans, pen tests, and reporting back to you, the holes and the gaps that you found, so that the data owner can correctly make decisions on what they should do to mitigate that threat. Now, the reality is not all mitigation strategies cost a lot of money, but sometimes they do cost convenience. Like it's inconvenient to have to use multi-factor authentication. I get it, but get over it. It's time, right? If banks are enforcing it, to get into their bank accounts, I'm pretty sure you should be enforcing it to get into all of your tools and access. And I know it's annoying. You get to grab your phone, type in the code, but it's kind of a big deal, right? It raises the bar. It makes it more difficult for attackers to cause harm to your environments. So be willing to sacrifice convenience to get better security. That really does make sense. And so if you're all working together, that's important. And I think April just asked a question saying, Jay, who makes sure that these three groups are working together? Well, all three groups are involved, but the data owner has the responsibility. In the event of a cyber attack, the data owner is going to be the one that has to answer, the legal briefs, and I'm using terms that are outside of my profession. So, be gentle with me, but the data owner owns the responsibility that they're getting the information and sharing it and using it accordingly. So I hope that makes sense. So let me give you a real life example, one that I've got firsthand knowledge with, so that's why I'm able to share this. I'm not going to call out the practice this happened to. Hopefully there we go. So in this case, I'm kind of showing you an executive summary. This happened in December of 2016. So I'm going back a ways. but this happens to businesses every day of the week. I'm just showing you one example because it was a really good use case of the teams not working well together. So the attack happened on the Friday night before Christmas, and Christmas was on a Sunday that year. And I'm telling you this because holiday weekends are a major, focal point for attackers. So if I'm a law firm, I know that your 3-day weekends and holidays like next week with Independence Day coming up here in the States, have your team shut their computers off before they leave for the holiday week, right? Just turn them off, disable anything that you don't need running so that the attack surface is minimized. But here's what happened in this case. So 5 million files were encrypted. These are employee records, these are case files, these are contracts. These are all kinds of things that exist out there, that are relevant to run their business. It was 83 or 85 workstations. It was 40 plus servers. They ended up paying 28 Bitcoins, which at the time was $25,000 a ransom. Now we're all thinking to ourselves, wow, if it was $25,000 today, I would just pay it too. No issues. But today a Bitcoin is, I don't know, $70,000. So we're talking about millions of dollars of ransom, and I'll explain what that means and how they're calculating that today. The reason they had to pay the ransom is because the backups were corrupted. It turns out the attackers had been in their network more than 300 days, and nobody noticed. 300 days. The average today for a ransomware attack, the attacker is in 23 days. And why this is important is because in that 23 days, they're browsing your files, looking at your tax records, looking at your payroll records, looking at your insurance documents that you've saved on the network, so they can see how much insurance you have, what your revenue is, and understand the impact. And typically, the insurance companies are saying this, and we agree, the attackers are asking for 10% of your annual revenue as ransom. They feel that 10% is a number that they can reach and certainly make it possible. So let's see, a question came in. Let me see if I can answer this. So regarding insurance providers, Corin's been told that if you make a cybersecurity claim, you will no longer be insurable. Is that accurate? I've not heard that, but the cost of insurance is going to go through the roof, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you may have to go to a subprime carrier, which means your ability to get insurance is going to be more difficult. And every insurance form I've ever seen over the years does ask, have you been a victim before, or has there been a loss claimed? And so they are going to measure that. And they also even ask, have you been denied coverage? So even if you didn't fall a victim, but you were denied coverage because you don't have the right controls in place, all of these are going to drive your insurance costs up. So again, important things to keep in mind. So let's keep going now through this scenario in Atlanta. So it's interesting because they were down for 2 weeks, even though they paid the ransom and they got their decryption key, okay? And that's because it took 39 hours per terabyte of data to restore. This law firm, those 5 million files, was 12 terabytes of data. Now, if you're technical and you're doing the math, right? 12 times 39 hours, you can see why it took so long, but it wasn't just restoring the data and getting the files decrypted. It was then wiping the entire network clean, because the attacker's still there, right? They say, oh yeah, we got paid, so we're out. No, they're not. They're still there, and you're going to become a victim again and again unless you rebuild the network and close the gaps that caused the problems. Now, the reason that I was involved is not because I was with CrowdStrike, but because it was a holiday week. CrowdStrike didn't have resources to send to Atlanta to go take care of this because their staff was off for the holidays. So they used a local resource, which we were, and we got involved in this restoration process, which was, it was crazy to see how bad it really was. My first hands-on experience as an outsider coming in. And so here's a few things to consider if this were to happen to you. First off, you've got to have an instant response plan. Get in place. Work with LMT if you don't have one, and really work through the issues and the things that happen during a cyber attack. It could be a ransomware attack, could be a a fraudulent wire transfer. It could be an extortion attack. It could be all kinds of other ways that they're attacked. But what does it look like? And think about these things before it happens. Who do you call? Where is your incident response plan stored? Is it printed? And you probably know that already, but don't have it only on the network where it will be encrypted. But start thinking about questions outside of the common ones. And so when I first sat down with the practice leaders, when I got there on Tuesday after it happened, so this is 4 days later when I got there, they were already in year-end rush and they were pretty freaked out. They had brought in Baker Hostetler to handle the coverage for them. Right? That was their attorney for the breach. Their insurance company brought in CrowdStrike for the forensic work. And then they brought us in to help gather the forensic data so that it could be analyzed. So when I sat down and realized they did not have an instant response plan for this scenario, I started with the basic questions. The first one was, when's your next payroll due? Now think about that, right? Your team is not going to work with you on this if they're not getting paid. So I needed to make sure that their IT people, we're getting compensated, that we're being paid, because they were about to put in very, very long days, which then leads me to the next thing. Be mindful of your technology staff, whether they're outsourced or whether they're in-house, the impact on them, because they're embarrassed by this. They're suffering with you because they never wanted this to happen to you. And they probably shared, scenarios with you that, this could happen, but never shared the impact of this. And so be mindful of their mental wellness and know that they need food, they need to get some rest, they need to unplug from this. So your insurance company will typically bring in additional help to support this, like I was. And I brought our team in and we helped, augment their team doing the work. So these are two things you don't think about when a cyber attack happens. It takes down your network. And Ella and I were talking about this a moment ago. We were talking about the impact of the CDK, which is a software company that provides software to auto dealers. That you've probably heard the news in the last few days. There's 15,000 auto dealers don't have access to their computers. Those teams right now are at a level of stress that are undeniable. So what else are you thinking about?
So I also had a question for you, and I think this is something that could be debated, is what are your thoughts on ransom, paying that ransom?
Yeah. So in this case, the backups were corrupted because the attackers actually had admin access to the network. So they logged into the backup servers. Here's where it's really interesting. 91 days before the attack, they went into the backups and they unchecked the backup jobs and stopped backing up the data. They only backed up the routine Windows files, ones that you get on the CD when you buy a computer. And nobody in IT on this team knows the backups weren't happening. They were actually getting the alerts every day. They get a report that shows that all of our servers could be recovered and that we'd be okay in the event of an outage. But they never tested the actual backups. So if they tested their backups twice a month, they would have known that their backups weren't being done. They would have gone and changed the files. They would have realized, hey, something strange is going on. Let's go see who changed this job, and then ask a lot of questions, and probably launch their incident response plan much earlier before the ransomware attack happened. Now, I said it was interesting because they only had 90 days of retention, meaning they only stored 90 days worth of data. So on day 91, the attackers know that they had not fixed the backup jobs, there were no backups, that they had them, in handcuffs, and that when they launched the attack, there'd be no way for them to recover. So the attackers are smart, right? They're paying attention. So then it becomes a business decision. And this is where it's really, really tough, because in this case, it's a law firm with 140 or so employees. They've got who knows how many hundreds of thousands of clients were impacted. And what do? You have no data. So their insurance company and their attorneys advised paying it. And they knew that to run their business, they have to, so they paid it. Today, if that ransom would have been $2 million, they still probably would have paid it. because the impact on their business and it's overwhelming. And the outcome of this was the insurance company's payout was like $2.3 million for ransom, for forensic work, for legal advice, for lost earnings because some of their contracts canceled because they didn't get them closed at the end of the year, recovery efforts, and it didn't seem like a lot of money back then, but it was a lot. I mean, I don't have $2.3 million laying around, so it was a lot to them. But today, it's so much more than that, and that's where I think it's really important, because at the end of the day, the ransom itself is a component of the payout, but it's usually a fraction of the total cost of getting back online. So, look, we have these conversations again from an education standpoint. So let's talk about what it means to actually, protect yourself, and how do we avoid this, moving forward. So what is this going to look like, and how are we going to approach it? And I think, Alma, you covered this best up front. When you said that there's 3 areas we have to focus on. It's not just some tools, right? But it's truly people, it's process, and it's technology. And if you focus on these 3 areas correctly when you're talking about it with your teams, this will make more sense. So let me kind of give you some examples here of what I mean by that. If you've only got investment in people, for example, right? If I kind of use this line right up here that just shows people, then you've got no way to execute, right? You can't do it in scale. You can't do it. You don't know what you're going to do. You got to go build process and technology to execute. If you've only got a process, but there's no one there implementing, there's no technology to support it and monitor it, then you're wasting your time. And by the way, this is not just cybersecurity. This is really true of any aspect of your business, right? You can apply this to manufacturing. You can apply this to case management. You can apply this to billing. It really does matter. If you've only got technology, it becomes shelfware. I can't tell you how many times people are like, well, I've got a firewall and we've got an antivirus. That should be enough. But then when we sit down in front of their computers, we put the mouse over their antivirus, it hasn't been updated in 412 days. That's shelfware. That's useless, right? So you would have had people in process to manage that. You would have been in better shape. So what if I've got 2 out of 3? What if I've got people in process? Well, that technology is hard to scale. I mean, we use technology in these processes today to track time, to track cases, to communicate with our clients and with opposing litigators, to talk to the courts. And we need that technology to build scale in our business. Like those car dealers today that are having to handwrite contracts and the service orders, they probably have forgotten how hard it is and what the value of technology is to them. If you've got people in technology but no process, you're going to inconsistently deliver outcomes, and that's not good. And if you've got process and technology but no one to do it, you get poor adoption. And the best example here is something as simple as security awareness training. I can't tell you how many times the practice manager or the owner's like, yeah, I understand all these things and the risk. I don't need to take these classes, but make sure my team does it because they need to know this stuff. Well, if you don't have the owners driving it and changing culture top down, you'll never get adoption from the rest of the company, and people will not adopt. So however you look at security and technology, you've got to solve for people, process, and technology. Without that, you're not going to be able to solve these challenges. So where do we focus, right? What does this look like? And I'm going to kind of give you an overview of what it means to protect data. Because, it's kind of like an onion, right? We talk about the layers of protection, and we talk about the layers of an onion. Data is at the heart of everything that you've got. So first is identity. We need to know who's accessing the data. Do they have permission to access it? What devices they're accessing it on? Is it a personal device or is it a company device? Where they're allowed to have access or not allowed to have access? And then who gave them permission to access this? We call that identity. If I know for sure that the person trying to access the data is using a device that's authorized and they have permission to the data, I'm in a better position. So things like multi-factor authentication, right? And multi-factor, if you didn't know this, really consists of 2, possibly 3 aspects. There's something there's something like a password or a PIN. There's something that you have like maybe a phone or an RSA key that gives you a code. And then there's something that you are. Could be your voice, could be your retina, could be your fingerprints. These are all things that allow us to check. And if we have at least two, we've raised the bar for cybersecurity and made it harder for attackers to get in. If I can get to all three, it's even better. Next are endpoints. Endpoints are not just your laptops or your workstations, but it's anything that moves data or that accesses data. So it's your cell phones, it's your tablets, it's your routers, your switches, your firewalls, your wireless access points, it's your laptops, it's your servers, and anything else that touches the data are things and devices that you have to consider securing. And it doesn't get to secure. Maybe you just put a policy in place that says, you know what, we no longer allow bring your own device except for your mobile phone. Everything else, you can't access company data on non-company owned equipment, right? These are important decisions that you'll make over time that you should lean towards to make things better. Next would be email. The FBI will tell you that half of all attacks still originate with email. Now, typically it's emails that are phishing, we call them, right? You've heard that term before, where we're trying to fish for your identity. See, if I can get your username and password and you don't have multi-factor authentication turned on, I can go log into Microsoft Office and start seeing your files and data and start to work my way through your network as a threat actor to gain access. If I can get access to your machine, then I can see what tools you have access to. And so email becomes the entry point to a lot of these attacks. Then lastly, cloud apps. Apps are applications, cloud tools. You've heard your IT teams push you to move things to the cloud lately, and that's right. So you have to maintain the infrastructure and the capabilities, but who's securing it? How's it move? And where does that data reside? Who's backing up, and how are they securing it? We hear horror stories of cloud service providers that have an application get compromised. Again, the CDK Global that's happening to car dealers right now is a perfect example. They were compromised and it happened downstream. So that's third-party risk. Those dealers trusted CDK with their technology, and the process they're now hurting. Think about it in your environment. What cloud apps do you guys use? Microsoft Office. You're probably using a time management software. You're probably using case management, and you're probably using a law library. All these things are things that will impact your business if they fall victim to a cyber attack. So holding them accountable matters. And then there's the one that we hear most often, and that is accounting system vendors. I don't know if you're using QuickBooks or Sage or some other specific part of your business is being driven by a third-party accounting system vendor. Horror stories of those vendors being compromised and then using their credentials to log into your network, as if they were doing a support call to update your software, and they use that to shut you down. So it doesn't matter if it's an accounting system vendor or other tools. Third-party risk is a big part of your day. So these are things that you need to know. So now let's talk about, we first called it 7 things, but I couldn't stop at 7. So what are the things you should do today when you start talking to your IT team, whether it be LMT or your other vendors that you guys are using, or your internal team, that even your committee that owns security and IT in your business? So let's start with people, the easy stuff. Awareness training. I'm really losing my voice and now I'm forgetting what's on the screen. The easy stuff, it's required and you should do it quarterly. Maybe even more often, right? With your aligned to fish testing every month. But think about this on a recurring basis. It has a major impact on your business because the humans in your environment are the front lines. They're the ones that might realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this, and they help avoid attacks. Next, you need to go review your company policies regarding technology, cybersecurity and all technology, and now AI. If you don't have those company policies in place on what's acceptable, do it now. Mark and I talked about, Nate and I talked about this at the event. The reality is that you start turning on these tools with AI, whether it be Microsoft Copilot or using ChatGPT, and putting a policy in place that tells your staff don't put company information in ChatGPT because it's not secure. They'll start using your client list and your contracts to train future responses. And your staff doesn't know that what they're doing is harmful. So you've got to teach them to put those policies in place. Next, you talk to your insurance agency and review your policies related to IT, cyber, AI risk. And if you're not sure what questions to ask your IT team, right, because you don't really know as the data owner what to ask, use that questionnaire from your insurance company to go through line by line with them and actually take a meaningful conversation and seek to understand what these things really mean to your business and what you have in place today and what you don't. Because all of these things are potential risk. If your insurance company is calling it out, this is not your IT team just telling you the sky is falling. It's there because they're underwriting guidelines that they know the impact of these things on your business. Next, let's go to process. Review your existing tools and see if you've got tools deployed that the company no longer uses. If that's the case, get them off the network. Make a backup, store it offline, and remove those tools from the network. That's what we call reducing or minimizing the attack surface. Right? I want less things that can cause harm. Next, review and access that third-party risk. Again, every vendor should be able to tell you how they secure their data and what they're doing on your behalf. You should start questioning those things and asking them for proof. In this scenario, it's verified before trust. Okay, it's a very important part of the conversation. So any third-party vendor, again, accounting, software vendors, IT teams, camera vendors, access control vendors, anything that you've got that touches your network, you want to know how they secure data. And they might need a little time to prep for it. Maybe they haven't been asked this question before, but they're going to be asked by a lot of people, so they should go ahead and prep. Next, make changes, push them to improve. You might not like the results of what they're doing or not doing, and now you're going to hold them accountable and say, look, we can't have you as a vendor with access to our network if that's all you're doing. So hold them accountable and let's raise the bar for everybody because rising tide raises all ships. Next, technology. I kind of mentioned this first one, right? Using the insurance policies checklist to see what technologies you have in place. Next, you should assess risk on a regular basis. At least quarterly review the risk, what's changed, what's new, and then annual testing on an annual basis. But even that might become twice a year, maybe even 4 times a year, where you're thinking about paying a third party to do pen testing. Not just vulnerability scans, but something more in depth to understand the things that have changed, because software vendors are rolling out new patches every day, and those new patches could be vulnerable. We just don't know it yet. Next, make sure that your team, that whoever's managing the security in your business, has a security operating center watching your business 24/7. At a minimum, with tools like managed detection and response and SIM. SIM is security incident event management. You want someone watching, looking for intruders, because if I can catch that intruder on minute 15 versus day 15, your risk comes way down. Right? So you need the tools in place that are designed to help solve these kinds of challenges. And ultimately, align to a framework. Pick NIST, pick CIS, pick something out there that other law firms are aligned to make sure that you meet the minimum standards of care. If you can show that you've done that you've taken reasonable steps to manage your business, as attorneys that's going to hold up, when someone's questioning your ability to maintain and secure their data. So let's get a little bit more granular on the technology. So I talked about that first box on the left, and Nate, you and I kind of worked through this list to make sure that it made sense. Well, what are your thoughts on these minimum technologies?
All of them are things that we're definitely advising all of our partners currently to implement, especially two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication everywhere is key, and then everything just layers on top. So yeah, the list looks great.
Yeah, if you think about your the onion, right? We're talking about data being in the middle. each of these technologies actually puts the onion back together again that protects the data itself. And so, if you're not sure where to start, start with this list. If you don't understand why these things are important, I could say, trust me, I've been doing this for a long time and I understand, but the reality is not that they matter. Multi-factor on everything is not just for the users, it's also for your administrators. Your administrators managing your firewalls and your backups and other tools, they need to have 2FA implemented, and ask them to prove it to you, ask them to show it to you. Awareness training, you're teaching your team about the impact of security. It's no longer optional. It's required for every person in the business, and you should make sure your vendors are doing this too, right? Next, email security. If you're still seeing spam, maybe it's time to look for alternative options, look for better technologies. Regular vulnerability scans. Your IT team should be doing this, but again, looking for known issues are very important. Test for phishing, right? Phish testing. These matter. Make sure that your users are learning from the awareness training that should improve over time. MDR. What that really is it's endpoint detection and response. It's the next generation of antivirus that's being managed by a SOC. Application whitelisting. There's technology out there that allows you to say, hey, only allow these tools to run and nothing else can. Sometimes it's annoying, right? It requires you sacrificing convenience because Adobe rolls out a new patch and someone needs to go test that before you allow it to be used by users. But it's worth the inconvenience to make sure that you don't make that mistake and deploy a tool that wasn't secure. SIEM, and that's security incident event management. What that does, in its simplest terms, is it's grabbing all the security logs from all the tools above it and all of your network devices and looking for patterns that are known patterns of attack. So sometimes there's things that happen. Someone tests a vulnerability here, that a new user is created over there, that something happens over here. Individually, those things by themselves are benign. But when you pair them together, you realize, oh, that vulnerability scan was run from a known and bad IP address. Maybe it's in a known country that we don't like. And somehow they created a user on the network, but the user creation by itself was with administrator credentials. So it's okay, but is it really? And then now we realize that the activity happening, these three things are tied together, and that's bad. SIEM looks at all those, and looks for those patterns. Then dark web monitoring. I'm not talking about monitoring your personal emails and your social security number for use in the dark web. I'm talking about your company credentials, having been found where your human resources lead gave up their passwords and to the network, and now they're for sale on the dark web. The sooner I identify that there's a problem, I can go change their passwords or require them to have 2FA that didn't have it. And now that password being available for sale has no impact. But if I didn't know it was for sale, I didn't know to go tell that person to change the password. So look, these are like the bare minimum today that you should have in place. And then there's some things that you should think about when it comes to managing risk. Hire or outsource a virtual chief information security officer, someone to look over your shoulder and make sure you're making good decisions that reports to your board or your leaders in the business. If you don't have one, kind of outsource or find a third party to help manage that risk around IT, cyber, and AI. Assume massive risk with AI, which we have talked about that before, especially from those third-party vendors. Matter of fact, my advice to our partners today is turn off ChatGPT, Gemini, and even Copilot until you put in policies, train your teams, and put in security around those tools. I know they're good. I know they help you, especially in law firms when it comes to reviewing and documents and analyzing and writing content. But someone's got to put process in place to make sure they're secure before you start using. And lastly, if you don't have cybersecurity insurance, which I have a hard time believing nobody on this call doesn't have it, but if you don't, go get it. It's very, very important. So with that, Alma, Nate, anything else you might miss that you want to add?
No. Thank you, Jay, for the valuable insight and presenting today. Really, really appreciate it.
I think we've
Yeah,
answered all the questions, Alma, right? I don't see anything new that came in.
let's see. Let's see if anyone else has any questions. But when you were talking about some of these minimum technology items here, and back to the three pillars, people, processes, technology, and with SIM, that's one thing where you're taking technology and people, right? Because there's the massive amount of information and data and logs to review. There's no way that people can have make be able to find through the noise, all the things that need to be actionable. So using the technology that's available right now is very important for anyone who wants to stay current and protect their environment. And for us as an MSP, we're constantly reaching out to our clients about new products and offerings, and it's just the evolution of the tool set and the ability to use technology to help us with the massive amount of information.
Yeah, you're right on. I mean, if I think about this, a typical law firm with 100 employees, just going to give you guys some scale, is going to see somewhere between 100,000 and 500,000 security signals. So security are just log alerts in any given month. Humans can't analyze that much data. It's just not possible. And technologies like MDR and SIM allow us to sort through that, looking for the needle in the haystack for the 7 things or the 12 things that could become security attacks. And so using that technology today is a perfect example of being proactive and showing due care. And yet, well, it's too expensive. Well, it's not anymore. These things have come down and they are realistic. They do fit budgets. And if you think about what it would mean to have a ransomware attack where they're asking for 10% of your revenue, it's not even close. And oh, by the way, the government's already requiring this in the financial services space. They're requiring it in healthcare. They're requiring it in Department of Defense. And it's only a matter of time before they expect all businesses to have this. So,
so get ahead
you're just getting ahead of
yourself
it.
now.
Yeah, over time,
Exactly.
that cost will actually come down. So it's not the end of the world. It just means that you're getting ahead. And I was watching a stupid Facebook video yesterday, but it was some people in a park. And I live in Denver. I hike a lot. I like to hike, and it was people that saw a bear and they turned and took off running. And of course, the bear almost caught the slowest person in the group. And in this case, the analogy, translates to, look, you don't have to have enough security that you're going to defend the U.S. Navy, but you got to have enough that you're more than your competition, right? Because at the end of the day, reputation and the impact of this is too much. I don't think anybody really wants to be in that scenario. So
yeah, I think one of the key things is to just start somewhere, right? If it's not if everything isn't in the budget or you're having a hard time getting adoption, just start somewhere. Start small and just start chipping away at these various controls and these solutions to implement them.
We got a question from Christian about AI and, where do we start? And I think the easiest answer is actually with your service partners. Start with LMT. Let them show you some sample policies. As law firms, I'm sure you're good at writing policies, no issues there, but let them show you, what a good policy includes. Everything from what's acceptable to what's not, to which technologies are approved, to which ones are not, and what the ramifications are of an employee that puts company information into a engine that wasn't approved. You guys have already reviewed policies and already written some sample policies for your clients to use, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we've been evaluating controls and attending trainings on AI security controls. We've got policy templates written. We have assessment tools for readiness that we can run within the companies and firms. So we do have some items that we can help firms prepare for AI. It's being baked into almost everything that we see now. Adobe, Windows, Office, search engines, it's everywhere. Getting prepared now is crucial.
Yeah, very much so. I agree with that. So look, on behalf of this and on behalf of us, thank you, LMT, for your time and for the opportunity to talk to your audience.
And feel free to reach out to us with any questions. We're here to help.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Nate.
Jay.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.